Hey everybody, welcome to wasmCloud Wednesday for Wednesday, August 13th. Today I'm joined with my co-host, Yordis. Yordis is here all the time, anyways, in the wasmCloud community meetings we're talking, and it came to my attention that, one, Yordis is working on a really interesting application of WebAssembly in the event sourcing space and using WebAssembly as an enabling technology, not so much like I need to do a WebAssembly thing. And I don't think he's really been able to show off any of his ideas or thoughts or anything in the community meeting. So, yeah, I wanted to just share really quick on the Decide. We basically have the whole meeting to chat today and talk about what this may look like. And just as a little bit of a primer, I have when Yordis and I were talking in Slack the other day, um, we started talking about how you could best use WebAssembly components for event sourcing. Because Yordis, I think you have a solution that's built not exactly on Wasm Cloud or not exactly on like components because you weren't like representing your event source system in WIT, but it is something that you want to be able to do. Um, just interrupt me at any time too. But yeah. Um, so I put together a little experimental repo. I put some effort into it, but this is certainly not fully featured. So anybody who's taking a look at this, don't take it with a grain of salt. But what I wanted to see what I could do, I wanted to see if I could represent something like an event source system using only using the composability of WebAssembly components. And I know that event sourcing is a pretty opinionated space. It's very like, once you start talking about how you write an application with event sourcing, there's this idea of like, oh, is this an aggregate or a handler? And then is it pure? Can you access this? So like, just take all this with the relative grain of salt. What I really want to do is I want to have a component. I want to represent like a specific domain logic in as a event sourcing application. And I want to handle all of the plumbing of like where do commands and events go and how do they get stored and how do they get routed to specific like handlers. I want to handle that transparently on behalf of the user. So I think that folks have had some pretty good success looking at the WIT before with something like this. Like WIT is basically a description of the functionality of your app, anyways. So I have a couple different types here, a couple different interfaces that you can implement. So there's the command handler interface, really nice. I called this what did I call this before? Aggregate. There are different like names for this, but essentially it's a component or part of your system that receives a command, something like record transaction or open account, things like that in the banking ecosystem. And you return a list of events to emit, things like account opened or account open failed. It's this whole, I don't want to go too far into the event sourcing pattern, but really at a base level, this is idea of handling commands and returning this list of events, which is this like immutable record of fact. Here's all the things that happened over time. Then you have an event handler. These event handlers are responsible for anytime an event enters the system. If you register interest in it, you can process this event. You can take certain actions. It's a whole thing on if you take side effects here or whatever. But you could return a list of commands in response to that event. Then we have some other ones with state, which I don't really want to get too far into. But the other components of the system, which you don't need to interact with, but this is what makes it work. There's the event sourcer component. This component is responsible for all of the, receiving a command and routing it to the specific command handlers, and then querying for specific events from there. There's the persistent storage layer, the event store. These are opinionated too, but essentially, since events are this immutable record of the past, whenever an event is emitted in the system, you'll store it with a certain timestamp, and that will essentially solidify that as something that happened. So we have all of this. The use of resources is pretty, not to toot my own flute or whatever, but the use of resources here is pretty clever for this event sourcing use case. What's really neat is that a resource here is a specifically it's an owned piece of it's an owned resource, kind of like a file descriptor. But when you pass it around, it's really just this opaque handle. So in all of the core system, we can work with events and commands, but we don't actually know what the event or command structure is. It's very custom to the business domain. And that actually works totally fine because all we know is that for commands and events and for state, that you essentially you can deserialize that command from a list of bytes. The guest gets to choose, and then you can ask to serialize that to bytes as well. So the whole system just works with a bunch of bytes, passes it around, and does so really efficiently with resources. So, at the end of the day, I just want to show, what this looks like. At the end of the day, a command handler, essentially, I'm actually doing something a little wacky and generating my event types from a protobuf, or a proto definition. Yordis, I included this just because I thought it would be neat that if you get to choose the serialization format, like you don't need to use WIT, you could use like SRT JSON or whatever. So I'm using the proto definitions for my events and commands. And then, this is in Rust, but of course you could do any component. And then essentially what I'm responsible for on the business logic side is implementing two functions. Rehydrate, which is here's every event that's happened. Probably could be more efficient, but here's every event that happened. Give me back the total state of the system. So I have bank events for account opened, transaction occurred, transaction denied. So I essentially can fold and create the state of every account and its balance, and then handling a specific event. So I get an incoming command. If it's a transaction, for example, I can take the current state, the balance of that account. If I subtract the amount and it's below zero, then I can emit a transaction denied, or I can emit a transaction, succeeded. So the business logic, really, really short, really not a complicated piece of software. You could represent so many different business domains with this, and it's all pretty reusable. And I think that there's a little bit more here on the composing components together piece, which maybe I could show, but I don't want to go just too far talking about like this experiment. So yeah, really interesting application of components. Maybe a diagram would help there. Uh, Yordis, do you mind if I hand it over to you to talk a little bit more about like what you've been working on, maybe what led to this experiment and like the chats that you've been having recently?
Yeah, probably it's gonna be a good idea to share how I ended up in Wasm Cloud and the why I'm chasing WebAssembly for this domain.
Yeah.
Because I think it's gonna matter a little bit to see like what problems it solve and the why behind it. So let me share the screen. Also, the code is not production ready. I'm experimented a lot. So yeah, so my career in the web as even sourcing started like almost like 5 years ago, 2020 or a little bit longer, if you include studying. But I've been doing it professionally since 2020, around that time, and it was all in Elixir, right? And in Elixir, we use commanded, and in the commanded framework, you have abstractions that allows you to abstract even away from quote unquote the event sourcing part of it, which is the storage mechanism. And most of the time, you're going to end up just defining your data structure. So when you see this embed schema, just imagine that that's just a type definition if you want to see it that way. It's not quite, but at the end of the day, you're going to end up with a lot of types in your systems, right? Defining the invariance of the correctness of that information. That includes, value objects if you come from domain-driven design, right? Just simple data, and other ones are just events, which are just a type of a value object. And there are two computations that you're going to run into, which you already showcase. The only two computational things, like actually functions that are supposed to do something, are the evolve or apply, which is the one you call rehydrate, right? Basically, it says given an state machine, right? I love that you call it state, by the way. I need to remove aggregate word. Given an state machine and an event, tell me what's the new state of my system back, right? And that was this function that you're gonna be doing, and it's just simply two functions in, the two arguments in, one argument out, like one data out, and then call it a, right? And the second type of function you're going to be dealing with is a command handler, right? Which you already saw it. So basically, it's given the state machine and the command, right? An intent now produce me events or an error out, right? So if you chase okay, let me put as much as I can in the infrastructure, most likely you're going to end up with those signatures, right? Like three type of data structure: the state, the command and events, and the value objects inside, and then two functions, right? The evolve or application of the events, and the command handling, basically like the decisioner. And that's it. So we did that, and in that project, so that's in the command side, right? Handling commands, because there's another piece of situation that you may deal with in event sourcing, which is a event reactivity, right? Like basically, it's just an event handler that reacts to an event, happening in the system, and then from there you do whatever you want in it, right? So in this case, for example, like when the diff is record, I just want to send an email, right? Open is just a job queue, or when the diff is requested, I want to do the diff checker or whatever, right? So I did this for a few years. The way I achieved the entire banking, because I did like a full banking system, United States, USA banking, is that there was absolutely no indeterministic code. That means that everything was assertions around the messages, right? And that's what started me in the journey of, okay, I need to find something that I can focus on the messages and the assertions on it, not necessarily in the behavior. And the second thing is that for me to achieve that, by discipline, I had to tell people, hey, in the implementation of the functions that you are dealing with, please don't call clocks, don't call anything that actually have indeterminism, right? Because at the end of the day, for me to achieve what I wanted, I need them to be disciplined, which that's what led me to WebAssembly. Because if I try to abstract this away from the developer so they don't make a mistake, in WebAssembly, we will have the control of that indeterminism. If I don't give you the clock, you don't get to use the clock. So that problem is what led me to WebAssembly to begin with. I want to honestly not rely on discipline, but actually give developers a tool that say, hey, you cannot mess up. And okay, at the platform level, right, we're going to deal with the complexity that is behind the scene in order to do that. And then lastly, Elixir, and compare with other programming languages when it comes to data structure, like types, static types, and stuff like that, is not the best one. So there's a lot of runtime checks that we're doing that maybe in other languages, maybe like more declarative through type systems, right? And you're not actually working in like macros and things like that. So that was also a benefit. It's like, okay, WebAssembly control the platform, the indeterminism, and then, okay, can a developer just use Go or JavaScript or whatever they like without having to be forced to use my framework programming language, but at the same time, I control the runtime. So as you can see, this is the whole thing that was driving me into wasmCloud, because that's pretty much what I was describing. I need wasmCloud underneath, taking all these components and injecting the right dependencies at the right time and control the actual infrastructure of it, right? So that was how I started and where I'm at. Yeah, so I can show you some code, some abstractions that are doing some what were you doing, Brooke, and like what I have thus far when it comes to it. So at the very low level, as you can see here, I have a component that's supposed to be a even source component, right? And as you can see, it's just a lot of data structures, right? Obviously, by the way, I'm not a ROS developer. I YOLO it with AI and like figure it out with experience. So, but as you can see, if you exclude the what would it be, the some of the infrastructure stuff like serialization stuff like that you may not want to hear, but put that aside, or debugging stuff like that, right? It's just data structures, just pure data structures, right? And then the computation aspect that I show you, like which is a command handler, which is called the site, right? Take the state, take the command, just give me a decision back. Or the evolve, which is like take the state, take the event, just give me the new state machine back. It's the exact same thing that you show. The little bit different is that, as you can see, I'm going with the really functional way, in a sense of like, hey, when the developer is working at this level, I don't want them to be getting caught up with stuff that are not related to the domain-specific language, right? And I think that's important because that also drives a lot of decisions that I'm making, Brooke, and like why I'm pushing you back in some of the stuff the way you did it, because I'm going from the experience of, hey, I want the engineers to be able to jump in any code because it's not about computer science, because all you get is like a function and data types, right? And it's not about infrastructure because you don't even need to understand that, because all you're speaking is in your language of here are the data that you have, and just figure out what needs to get done for your domain's sake. So this is normally like the first layer of it, right? This by itself is not enough because the even sourcing, what would I say, wrap, right? Because there's nothing here about even sourcing. Yes, there's concept of events and state, but that like you could actually do this in a state change driven situation. It's just that you need to translate the events into insert, delete, and stuff like that into a database, right? But I want the event sourcing part of it, which I need to wrap it around. At that layer is where I have this in Wasm, and I'm using exorcism for now. But at this, and the events WebAssembly level or even sourcing layer, you're gonna be like, okay, now I need to start thinking about the streams, right? Like I need to identify which stream I need to read the events from, right? And most likely you're gonna, map from the command into that stream ID, right? However you want it, right? This is just a key. But this is also where the width, I would like to take advantage of width and figure out how I don't have to repeat this all over the place, because I also have to wrap the region of functions that I have for the sake of WebAssembly, right? Because when I go from WebAssembly into my component, I have only a byte array, right? I don't know what the data types is because the width specification didn't allow me to do that, and that's the type of things that I wish I can. So because I don't know that, there is a lot of wrapping in, like marshaling in and out of like WebAssembly lack of understanding of my types, right? Or like somehow map it directly into my programming language level, data types, whatever that means. So that's the things that you would see at this level, right? Like the evolve is like, JSON of two data structures in, and then figure out how to deserialize for the sake of WebAssembly and pass it to my functions, right? So it's just a wrapper, and the same because of even sourcing, you need to figure out how to go from your data types into the type, a string type of the events that you save in the event store. And that's what you would do at this level. Same in the design. I can show you later, Brooke, like some interesting things, but like the decisioner, you cannot only return events. Sometimes you need to return like a monad act, like a batch of operations that you're gonna call them, apply the events, and continue to the next one, because you may need to actually, raise the events to then figure out what was the state of the state machine, to then figure out if you need errors or continue raising events. So this is something interesting, but it's part of like SDK or abstractions that you shouldn't matter. So yeah, so that's at this level. And then you take this component, and what I did in my platform, because I love composition, is you have the Wasm event sourcing, right? Because nothing here again is about like connecting it to the infra whatnot, right? Like it's just marshaling data in and out. So then I have this other component that takes a given plugin, and then it's the one who is doing the calls in and out of like those components, right? For example, here's a command dispatching. All I do is like, okay, give me the event store, give me the command, and every time you see this plugin is most likely like going into a component, right? So like I get the stream ID, I get the initial state, I request all the events in the event store, I loop through them, and marshal them. It's sorry, like yeah, marshal them from the event store, then give it back to it again. This is weird, by the way, and I know it's weird, but this is the type of things like I want to figure out what's the most optimal solution. But like, yeah, you get the events, you marshal it into the type you need it, you evolve your state machine, right? Then you just say, okay, make the decision, the command handler, and then marshal back events for the sake of the event store, and then you get out and then finish. Um, then you take this module and you go to your main function or whatever infrastructure you have. And in there, you could just repeat the same of, for example, in this particular case, right? Just as an MVP, I have a NATS, wink, wink, that is consuming commands. And all I'm doing is just taking that command, finding whatever service between quote it is. I hard code it here to the module, deal with it. But I just initialize that extracism module and then run it through the abstraction that I gave you, and then just reply back, right? So this is the whole experimentation that I have. So related to wasmCloud, you can imagine that I don't want to be dealing with this section here. How do I deploy my plugins? Where am I gonna deploy my plugins? It's in a file system. It's in a storage bucket. Like how am I gonna do with that? Second, how am I gonna be dealing with routing that into a given service? Like how this section here. Like how am I gonna scale that command handling and so on, right? So this is where my experimentation eventually is supposed to be connecting to wasmCloud, because all this module just becomes a wasmCloud specific concern, as in how I deploy it, how I connect it to the actual physical providers that I need, and how to route my commands and just give me the data in and data out. Yeah, so, and the width, given that it would be flexible enough for me to describe my data types, I would be using these types directly from my width specification. As given the fact that the width specification is good enough to just use it as an abstraction for my data types. Because all I need is just marshalling information, do some sort of like basic validations of the information in it sometimes. That is not related to the shape of it, and then just at the function, right? So, yeah. Now, related to, in your example, you only have one module that is handling multiple commands, right? And this is where the discrepancy broke of like, okay, let me see how much I can reduce the complexity of understanding a problem and where I'm apart from the domain-driven design event sourcing community, which is like, I'm gonna go for this domain-driven design concept of aggregates and single objects for everything, while I start moving more towards, okay, no. In event sourcing, all you care is like, here's an stream on events, and that's your focus. It's around the stream, but not just that, it's around the use case in a given moment with a given piece of information, the events. And because of that, let me see if I can find it. I started doing experimentation in terms of, okay, what is the most, what is my unit of work that I should be able to deploy independently and reduce the risk of deployment, right? Because if I have one component that is handling all the commands, any change that may not affect another use case now becomes a risk of deployment, right? Like, why are you redeploying, I don't know, something that is dealing with creating the bank account at the same time that something related to like closing the bank account, like I have nothing to do with each other and they're just stable. So like I don't want to be deploying things like that. Or when engineers thinking about the problems, they need to be thinking about their own state machines, because in event sourcing, the collaboration happened through the events, right? And the good thing is that events are immutable, so you cannot change it. And therefore, you can make assumptions about the past and the future, right? Because if I handle, in this particular case, for example, the only two states or 8 state that I handle from the event are the IDs. If anything else happen in that events, and for my particular use case, doesn't matter, I don't need to worry about it, right? So that's what I mean by like I can actually predict the future because I care only about my use cases. In practice, there's some duplication of code that I observe that it's okay to do so because we're talking about really basic computation, right? It's like basic copied information from one place into the other one. And I gain in the flexibility of anything related to a given use case was in one file, which in the LLM era, that's extremely valuable because that means I reduce the context to the most granular possible that is really for my use case. So hallucination wouldn't happen as much. Yeah, so because of that, and I can try to see if I have it here, was an actor, right? Like for me to show you, like I did this with my former CTO, right? I took and I split apart the command handling. And for the sake of that, I just took and say, okay, I'm just gonna create a function that is the exact same signature, but it's gonna care only about handling that command, right? Because you're gonna have most likely a switch statement, then the developer will come and say, well, but I want to switch statement into a function just so I can just move the code related to it because I cannot deal with 500 lines of code of a switch statement. I go crazy, okay? I'm gonna embrace that. And then when I start doing that, you're gonna notice that only few keys, like I explained to you, are happening to those functions. So that means that in this function, is archive matters, but in other functions we don't. And in this function, is drain actually matters, right? So like this is where the pattern recognition of like, hey, hold on, is this the single command handler the unit of work, or is there is a smarter routing that we could do? And how is that related to all the stuff? Well, I took your example and then I did the width or trying to do the width, right? To see how it would go. So I would have the open account and I would have the transaction account, right? I no longer have one module, I have two modules. And then in every single one of them, by the way, you can change this, I really don't know. But in every single one of them, you have to deal with defining your interface that always gonna be, I'm gonna handle a command. And I'm gonna have my own evolve function because that state machine is your own state machine. It's not something that is shared across. If you want to, in the implementation detail, share it or not, that's up to you. That's not the point. The point is like, you don't have to, right? Like from the architecture perspective, like I'm giving you the most granular way to deal with the problem. If you want to share code, by all means share it, but you're not forced to share code from the get-go. So if something is trivial, don't share code. Just, the rule of 3. So, but that means that there is a lot of duplication because every single will that handles a command had to somewhat share. Wait, where did it go? I had to share like an interface to some extent, as if it was a template. Have to share the evolve, have to share the command, the handling, and then for every single state that you already show, you're gonna have the state machine, which is a record or whatever. I really don't care about that part, but you have to deal with the initial state of it, serializing, deserializing, the same for the command, right? So this is where, from the width perspective, the generic concept start becoming somewhat valuable. Because if you think this will as a generic thing that I can inject the different data types, you will realize that we could just templatize some of these sections, right? And then it's just a matter of like generating the final width for it. And then the last mile that is not here is actually the events itself. No, not here. Where did I put it? Bank account. Is the event itself, because that is the actual true shareable module. If you want to, a given version is a true shareable module because that's the one that we are agreeing on. So that one definitely it would affect the deployment depending on the information that is inside. And also the stuff that you did, Brooke, and then this stuff that I show is in the command side. But when you're dealing with the event reactivity, you also need to be able to figure out how to marshal those events. So ideally, I can just give you a Wasm module that says, hey, here's your width for your data types and the programming language level, and here's a module that already deal with marshaling in and out, so you don't even care about that, right? So uh, yeah, so the full story of where I'm at, the experimentations and so on. And lastly, you use product buffer. That's the last thing that I don't know. I don't know how to think about it and to what extent I want to leverage the width as not my serialization, but as close as the serialization as possible. So we don't have to duplicate the effort of having product buffer and width. Uh, or if that is the case, how can I just focus in the product buffer and be able to have something that is compatible with, in the width, so we don't have that much duplication and effort around something that is just a data type, right? I think, let me see if I can find, where is the auction system? Because in the auction, I'm actually using, oh, Jesus, where did I put that in here? Yeah, in the action, for example, like this is like a Go version. This type of coding is what I will become like my WebAssembly initialization or whatever. It's like, okay, put a bunch of these function pointers and like modules and so on, and then that's the thing that you would deploy. And behind the scene in here, for example, I'm using like product buffer, uh, primarily because Go lack of union types. But the second thing, like I really don't care. This is just a back of information. I need somehow to serialize and deserialize, and like I'm okay combining those two layers. So yeah, that's it. Questions, answers.
Yeah, Yordis, thank you for coming on and just like talking through all of this. First of all, um, and everybody, please don't let me just monopolize all the time. But I loved like jumping from like Elixir to Go to Rust, like seeing the evolution of your project. Like it's really cool. Like you've been thinking about this stuff for years. And so like Wasm as a potential enabler for like a better version of this system is like it's super cool. I love seeing that history and I'm glad that we have it like here on recording. We can refer back to it. It's really cool.
Yeah,
Um
that's my intent today. It's kind of like if something doesn't make sense, well, hopefully I can follow up or whatever. But like, yeah, Brooke, like primarily um, that better together story resonate with me way too much because at some point in my career, like I became the leader and I have two choices. I can blame my developers and say you're lazy or whatever label I want to put or no smart enough or no hard work enough, or are trying to, okay, let me see what we can do in the industry and like from my perspective that would empower that person. And that's what I was try driving me into what WebAssembly can actually enable and the type of cultural aspect that could happen from it, right? And that was like I said, that was the very first thing, right? Like I saw my engineers in the Elixir code. Okay, fine, the platform is amazing, right? Like there's nothing better out there for me to deal with distributed computing, but the language is not in specific aspects, especially the platform, again, controlling the side effects and so on. So yeah, that's why I'm forcing myself to be like polyglot. I'm gonna figure this out for everybody. Yeah.
yeah, so a big aspect of all of this is that like when since you're doing this in WebAssembly, if you're gonna cross the WASM like ABI, like the WASM application boundary from guest to host, then you need to have some representation of what's crossing that boundary. And I feel like that's the core of like this experimentation is how do you represent a command, an event, a state in such a way that it can cross the WebAssembly boundary. It can be represented in a concrete way, but like provided by the developer. And, but I mean, this is classic. Like, I can see why you went Xism. It's classic WASI P1. Like, if you don't know how to represent a concrete type, then what you do is you go, well, I can represent it as a vec of bytes and then give you some pointers. And like that's essentially what the Xism thing is doing here. It's exactly what we did in like wasmCloud years and years ago. But now that there's the component model, there is a rich language for describing
Yep.
um,
Ways.
complex types. Like that's the whole point of the entire proposal, the whole point of the component model. Um,
Yeah.
but you're definitely seeing that like the component model doesn't have generics right now. Um, Resources are actually almost close to representing something like generics. That was honestly the entire point of my POC was to show how you could represent this resource of a command and event. But the drawback is that, in doing so, whenever with resources, you can cross the WASM boundary with this opaque handle. But when you need to store it, like in the event store, when you need to, you know, deserialize it from some concrete type, you do have to go from bytes to this concrete type, which I
Right.
think you have to do no matter what system you're working in. So yeah, that was honestly the main point of how I was trying to cleverly use resources, and I hope that that was fun and like a fun thought exercise.
Yeah.
But one of the reasons why I used protos to represent the events instead, I had two reasons to do that. One was just to show that you don't have to use wit to represent your events. In this case, you can just basically pick. Um, and two, there's this project. Oh no, I'm forgetting it. Event catalog. That, like basically if you have your events defined in like a proto or open API format, then it'll generate this whole like basically website for you of like how your events and commands relate to each other. And I was like, this would be dope to just have for free. Uh, so yeah,
Yeah.
that was the main reason. And you know, I wanted to dig a little deeper on you representing your events and stuff in Wit.
Yeah, the one thing that is a me problem that I self-induce is that I'm going from the experience I want and figure out how to get there. So that's why you see me a lot of pushback into like I know that you could jump around the situation and do this and do that, right? That's okay. But I want this that I'm showing you right now to be the experience when somebody is developing. That means like if we all do our best, I don't see wasmCloud, but it's there. I don't see WebAssembly, but it's there, right? All I see is like, hey, I have my own specific domain to be an expert at and do my work, right? And that's what it forcing me, Brooke, to like push people back. It's like I know you can jump around the problems, but what I'm saying is like, can we figure out something that honestly would put these things aside in a good way, in like the most powerful way, because that will prove that the platform is simple enough, right, and is valuable, but also is no intrusive. Uh, and yeah, that has been the tricky bit, and that has been a lot of experimentations and like why I'm being like, okay, let me wait for the WASI preview 2 and all these things. Let me see where width is going and yada yada, right? So yeah, that's the tricky bit because I can jump around and make it work, but like okay, I want this. I don't want people to think about anything else other than here's three data structures and two functions.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, in some way, shape, or form, like Wasm Cloud does something really has to do something really similar. Like it doesn't matter if we have to do like ugly things, plugging like
Mm-hmm.
WebAssembly interfaces together in the back or whatever, as long as like the user experience, like the developer who comes and uses it is really crisp. Like that's the thing that matters the
Yep.
most. And with so here you have this represented in Rust, but all of these different structures, it's exactly what people run into when they want to write a WASM application. Like the ideal is that you're not showing up trying to write a WASM application. You just show up and you're like, I like Go. I wrote Go app. I
Yep.
compiled Go to
Yep.
WASM. Oh, hey, keyboard. Um, yeah.
Yeah.
So Yordis, well, I don't know if there's something else.
To some extent, this is what I want, by the way, because everything else is just information. It's representing information,
Yeah, yeah,
right? Like I don't even want to write all this, right? That could be my width types, right? It's just information. it's no behavior, right? And in a good way, I feel.
Yeah, it's almost like you know, if you're gonna if you're modeling a business domain, you can do it in terms of like this structure of events. You know,
Mhm.
so event sourcing, whatever. But you know, you pick the thing. Yeah, I wanted to ask, so Yordis, you actually had a meeting with Luke Wagner, one of the
Mhm.
original creators of Wasm and still mega active in the space, like implementing things.
Mhm.
One of the designers of like WASI P3, like the native async and the component model, like he's still all over the place. Hi
Mhm.
Luke, if you're watching this, thanks for all you do. Um, so you had a conversation with Luke the other day just to bring up some of the which I'm really glad you did because I feel like you are driving towards this experience in the native language and you're like, I want to do this in wit. You know, I really, you know, I need these things. You know, I know that there are reasons why they don't exist, but like how can we make it happen or how can I
Right.
help? Um,
Yeah.
did you want to talk a little bit about like your meeting, like what you guys talked about and
Yep.
you know, where you got?
Yeah. So it's basically like I share with him the reason why event sourcing all this stuff. Like I say, like just control determinism in the system. Like you don't get to shoot yourself in the foot. But at the end of the day, what I show him is like, hey, I need to be able to connect all my product buffer, which again, like some people see as a serialization mechanism. It has value in it. I use it more from like my specification of my information, and especially with the tools that do not allow me to break change, right? So I need to be able to close the gap between would a width be my specification or do I want something like product buffer to be my specification? I don't have any strong opinions, right? But I need to close that gap, right? And if width is gonna be my specification, then you need to provide me enough data types that make most programming languages uh, descriptive enough, right? For example, one of the conversations related to it that we had is that there is a issue that is open about dictionaries, right? And we talk about this. It's like, hey, I really need maps, right? Because it's actually really common in the ecosystem. And most engineers don't want to be dealing with this transformation between a map, like a list of tuples, into a map in the programming language and so on. And I don't want to create a framework and a bloated SDK around width to like make the user experience better because I can also go for the route, right? Okay, you see width, but technically I have my own layer of SDK things that like are hiding it from you. And if that's gonna be the ultimate solution, so be it. I'm gonna do it. But I'm trying to figure out how to avoid being, too far away from something that is just WebAssembly. You technically don't even need anything on top of it other than the width, right? So that has been my focus. But again, for that I need something like the maps. And there is another issue as well that is the structs. In product buffer, structs are like JSON, which is like, a specific values that is like, hey, here's a do whatever the heck you want, infinite loop in as long as it's string numbers, array, and structs and stuff like that, right? So like that was a conversation. It's like, hey, I need something like dictionaries or map. Don't call it dictionary. I need something like maps. Then eventually I'm gonna need something like structs, right? And that would free up the short, uh, uh, yeah, the shortcomings of me able to move most of my product buffer, if not everything, into width. And at that point, everything related to the data types that are being shown you just becomes a width SDK tooling generate me these types in my programming language. The same with the problem I show you about, hey, if I took what you did and I implement my philosophy, the stuff I learned, then you see the repeatedness in every single width file, which is about evolve, handling, command, and every single one of them is technically, hey, just swap that type there. And that's where the templating, generics, whatever you want to call it, come from. But the point is like, here's another issue for somebody was talking about it. The point is like, hey, I'm gonna give you a type that I will understand it, uh, you know, but the host to some extent don't care too much. The host is like, hey, I know the API, but I don't care what is inside. But and in your guest component, you're gonna have like the fastest way to literally map into your programming language data structure, in memory representation or whatever. So that's where the second like feature, well, the struct is also the third one, but that's like the three use cases that I've been talking to him, like showing with him, like, hey, here's the context of why I need this, and again, coming from the perspective of I don't want to add that many layers on top of width. So thus far, I think he agrees on like the maps, right? And he's working already in a specification for it. So wait and see what's gonna happen there. Structs, I think, is a little more tricky. He said something about recursive thing that is not that easy. I don't know. I cannot speak for it, but that was a concern. So that could be also the next step after the maps.
Yeah, yeah, all three I think are things that have come up before, like a native map slash dictionary, recursive types, and generic types, which, ultimately every guest language solves in their own way. I mean, I feel like maps are pretty concrete. That's a little more well defined. I'm not aware of a language that doesn't have maps, but cool. I don't know. Maybe C. I don't know, man. uh,
Yeah, well, but by not if not, like it's okay if we have to agree in some shared SDK that makes sense for that programming language,
mhm.
regardless of my tooling. I can take that route as well, but like that's where for me it matters a lot the alignment. I don't want to be like creating, you know, sub culture or whatever that becomes its own thing, and now we cannot speak anymore the same language. Uh, which
Yeah,
is one of the reasons I resonate so much with the stuff you guys do at wasmCloud, because I know you could take those shortcuts, but you have been like pushing it to like, no, WebAssembly first, then wasmCloud, and like that's like somewhat resonate with the stuff I'm trying to do.
yeah, yeah, and it makes a lot of sense that what's the saying? Can't boil the ocean. Like with Wasm, like we just can't land literally everything all the time. But having this end goal, I feel like you have this like end goal. And, when you look at maps, for example, like my first response is like, oh yeah, we don't have maps. You can just do list tuple tuple though, and then it's basically the same thing. And you're like, I know. I know I can do that. I don't want that exactly though. Like there's gonna be, and same with recursive types. There's like little workarounds and stuff. And I think realistically, that is how we build up this ecosystem of tools. We have the baseline. That's like kind of the goal of WASI 2 is to have this like WASI 2, WASI 0.2, WASI also. Um, you have these baseline set of interfaces you can use to represent a system. And it's not everything. There's going to be workarounds for a lot of stuff, but if we have this, then we can figure out what's missing and then build that stuff one at a time. Um,
Yeah,
so
hopefully that makes sense why I keep pushing back and like just do this. It's like I don't want to do that.
yeah, yeah. Which, there are some times that like you have to make the choice, right? It's like I don't, this isn't something that I want to do. Makes sense. Um, like the map wrapper or whatever, like it stinks to do a conversion basically from list tuple tuple to map every time. Or to kind of wrap that because it changes the semantics and whatever. But no, it's all really good pushback, Yordis, and I'm just really glad that you're participating in the upstream issues. I think you have like a really big idea in the event sourcing piece, but the concrete use cases, like here is how I want to write an application that targets WASM, um, only helps to drive like what the implementation should look like.
Yeah, yeah, and in the worst case, if the answer is it is what it is, okay, fine, we just document it and then move on, right? That's like right now I don't have a business and time to to worry about it. But like that's also my intent. It's like, okay, let me push it, and I'm gonna take ownership of trying to push it myself. And if at the end of the route all I learn is like, look, you cannot do it your way, like here's the trade-off, it's fine. Like I documented, move on. But like now we know. So
Yeah.
I'm just yeah.
Well, hey folks, thanks for coming for this basically panel where Yordis and I just talk back and forth. Does anybody have, I know we're getting close to time. Does anybody have any other questions or comments or things that, for Yordis's work here? Cool. Uh that means it all made sense and everybody understood.
True. Perfect. Nothing wrong with it.
Um, well, hey Yordis, this is awesome. I can't wait to see. Hey, it's awesome. Heck yeah.
Yeah.
Um, is there any link that you want me to throw into like the community meeting notes? Because like I have a link to your PR that's like proposing some changes into the Cosmonic Labs repo. You know, we're not, I'm not really doing anything with that. I just wanted to put it out there so that anybody could take a look as a reference, and
Hmm.
it's an interesting possible pattern. So maybe somebody will take it and run with it. But yeah, do you want me to?
Yeah, I'm
Uh,
gonna share with you some links, primarily around the issues that they could follow, stuff like that, that may be like related to what we did.
okay.
You mentioned actor in the chat. Now I just see it. Though.
I, it's killing me, man. It was cool to see Elixir again, though. It's a fun language.
Yeah, 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 for sure.
Well, thanks for coming today. Happy Wasm Cloud Wednesday. I think we're about halfway through our quarter two. Maybe next week we'll be halfway through the quarter three roadmap. So maybe we'll do a roadmap check-in, and then yeah, I feel like we've had a really awesome sequence of calls, people coming on and showing what they built. So if anybody wants to fill that role and show what they've been building, I'll always take seeing an application of it than, me just spitting out a demo. So it'd be really cool. Thanks again, Yordis, for coming today.
All right.
All right, folks. Have a